No one in that family ever spoke of that night, until today. A night that would shatter trust, reveal secrets, and leave a wedding forever haunted. Picture this. A beautiful June evening, string lights glowing across a backyard reception, 200 guests celebrating what seemed like the perfect union. But upstairs, behind a locked bedroom door, something was happening that would turn celebration into catastrophe in the span of a single heartbeat. The groom, a man who had waited years for this moment, was about to discover something that no person should ever witness on what's supposed to be the happiest day of their life. His hand trembled on that doorknob. The muffled sounds from inside made his stomach turn. And when he finally opened that door, when he saw what was really happening in that room, his entire world collapsed. This isn't fiction. This is a story pulled from the darkest corners of family secrets, adapted to protect identities, but rooted in a truth so devastating it's hard to believe it actually happened. He thought it was the happiest day of his life. But what he found behind that door, no one could have imagined. Who betrayed him? Why would someone do this on a wedding night of all nights? And what would she do next when everything was exposed, when there was no hiding, no running, nowhere to turn? These are the questions that haunt this story. In the moments that followed that discovery, choices were made that would ripple through generations. Trust was obliterated. Relationships were redefined. And the truth, when it finally came out, was somehow more complicated than the worst assumptions anyone could make. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Emma, and she was the girl everyone admired. 26 years old, with the kind of natural charisma that lit up every room she entered. She worked as an elementary school teacher, the type who stayed late to help struggling students, who remembered every child's birthday, who made learning feel like magic. Her laugh was infectious. Her kindness seemed genuine. When she walked down the street in their small Connecticut town, people waved. Store owners knew her name. She volunteered at the food bank every Saturday morning without fail. To the outside world, Emma was exactly the kind of woman any man would be lucky to marry. And then there was Michael, 30 years old, the son everyone expected greatness from. He had grown up in that same town, the eldest of 3 brothers, the one who had gone to college on a football scholarship and come back to take over his father's construction business. Michael was the dependable one, the one who showed up when he said he would, who kept his promises, who worked 70-hour weeks to build something meaningful. His father, Robert, a 62-year-old man with calloused hands and unwavering principles, had built that construction company from nothing. Robert had taught Michael everything, not just about business, but about integrity, about being a man of your word, about family loyalty above all else. Michael worshipped his father. Everyone did. Robert was the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back, who had employed half the town at one point or another, who never turned away someone in need. When Michael and Emma got engaged after 3 years of dating, the whole town celebrated. They seemed perfect together. She softened his serious edges. He grounded her free spirit. The wedding was planned for June 15th at the family home, a sprawling property with gardens that Emma's mother and sisters spent months preparing. 200 guests. A string quartet. Emma's dress cost $8,000, a splurge her parents insisted on because their daughter deserved perfection. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Emma seemed radiant but occasionally distant. Her maid of honor, her sister Jessica, noticed it first. Emma would zone out during cake tastings, stare at her phone with an expression Jessica couldn't quite read, excuse herself from conversations that went on too long. When Jessica asked if everything was okay, Emma always smiled and said she was just overwhelmed with planning, just tired from work, just excited and nervous like any bride would be. Michael noticed it too, but he chalked it up to wedding stress. He was dealing with his own pressures. After all, a major construction project that had gone over budget, family expectations about the wedding being flawless, his father's increasing health concerns that no one wanted to acknowledge but everyone worried about silently. The week before the wedding, Robert had a scare, chest pains that sent him to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. Tests showed nothing conclusive, but the doctors warned about stress, about taking it easy, about the toll that decades of physical labor had taken on his heart. Michael was terrified of losing his father. Robert brushed it off, insisted he'd be fine for the wedding, told Michael to focus on his bride, and stop worrying about an old man who still had plenty of years left. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, cloudless skies, and a gentle breeze that made the garden decorations sway like something out of a fairy tale. The ceremony was flawless. Emma walked down the aisle in that $8,000 dress, and when Michael saw her, tears streamed down his face. She was breathtaking. His father stood beside him as best man, chest puffed with pride, eyes glistening. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises about forever and weathering storms together and choosing each other every single day. The guests applauded. Emma's mother sobbed happy tears. It was everything a wedding should be. The reception kicked off with champagne toasts and a first dance that had everyone reaching for tissues. Michael held Emma close, whispered that he was the luckiest man alive, told her he couldn't wait to start their life together. She smiled, kissed him softly, said she loved him more than words could express. But there was something in her eyes, something Michael would replay in his mind 1,000 times later, a flicker of something he couldn't name at the time. 3 hours into the reception, as dinner was being served and the dance floor was packed with relatives showing off questionable moves, Michael realized he hadn't seen his father in a while. Robert had been there for the toasts, had danced with Emma during the father-daughter-in-law dance, had clapped Michael on the back and told him how proud he was. But now, looking around the crowded backyard, Michael couldn't spot him anywhere. He checked the bar, the buffet table, the cluster of uncles smoking cigars by the fence. No Robert. A thread of worry pulled tight in Michael's chest. His father's health scare was still fresh in his mind. What if something had happened? What if Robert had felt chest pains again and hadn't wanted to ruin the wedding by making a scene? Michael excused himself from a conversation with his college buddies and headed toward the house. The main floor was empty, eerily quiet compared to the celebration outside. He called out for his father. No response. He checked the downstairs bathroom, the study, the kitchen where catering staff were plating desserts. Nothing. That's when he heard it. Faint sounds coming from upstairs. Muffled voices, maybe. Or movement. Michael took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart beginning to race for reasons he didn't yet understand. The master bedroom door, his childhood bedroom that his parents still used, was closed. The sounds were clearer now, and they made his stomach drop, made his mouth go dry, made every instinct scream that something was wrong. He stood outside that door for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. His hand reached for the doorknob. It was unlocked. He turned it slowly, pushed the door open, and what he saw in that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. His father, Robert, the man he idolized, was there. And so was Emma, his bride, his wife of 3 hours. They weren't just talking. They weren't comforting each other over some family drama. They were tangled together on the bed, Emma's wedding dress bunched around her waist, Robert's shirt unbuttoned, both of them frozen in shock as the door swung open and Michael stood there, paralyzed, unable to process what his eyes were showing him. The room went silent except for Michael's ragged breathing. Emma's face drained of all color. Robert stumbled backward, trying to button his shirt with shaking hands. And Michael just stood there, his brain refusing to accept reality, searching desperately for any explanation that would make this something other than what it so obviously was. The seconds that followed felt like drowning. Michael's vision narrowed to a tunnel. Sounds became muffled and distant, and his body moved on autopilot, backing out of the room, stumbling down the hallway, gripping the banister to keep from collapsing as he made his way downstairs. Behind him, he heard Emma calling his name, her voice cracking with panic, heard her footsteps chasing after him. He didn't turn around. Couldn't. If he looked at her, if he saw her face, he might completely shatter right there on the stairs of his childhood home, while 200 people danced and celebrated outside, completely oblivious to the nightmare unfolding inside. Michael made it to the downstairs bathroom and locked the door. He leaned over the sink, gripping the porcelain so hard his knuckles went white, staring at his own reflection and not recognizing the man staring back. His father. His own father. With his wife. On their wedding day. The betrayal was so massive, so incomprehensible, that his mind kept trying to reject it, kept searching for alternative explanations that might make sense. Maybe he had misunderstood what he saw. Maybe there was context he was missing. Maybe this was some kind of nightmare, and he'd wake up any second. But he knew. Deep down, he knew exactly what he'd witnessed. Emma was outside the bathroom door now, knocking softly, begging him to open it, to let her explain. "Michael, please. Please, you have to listen to me. It's not what you think. I can explain everything. Please, just open the door." Her voice was desperate, broken, and part of him wanted to hear what she could possibly say to justify what he'd seen. But a larger part, the part that was crumbling under the weight of this betrayal, couldn't bear to look at her. His father appeared in the hallway too. Michael could hear his heavy footsteps, hear him telling Emma to give Michael space, hear the tremor in Robert's voice that Michael had never heard before, not even during the health scare. "Son," Robert said through the door, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to talk to you. I need to explain. It's complicated. Please, Michael, please let me explain." Complicated. The word echoed in Michael's head. What could possibly be complicated about walking in on your father and your bride together? What explanation could ever make that okay? But there was something in his father's tone, something beyond guilt, something that sounded almost like anguish mixed with resignation, that made Michael's anger pause just long enough for curiosity to creep in. He unlocked the bathroom door, but didn't open it. A moment later, Robert pushed it open slowly, his face aged a decade in the last 10 minutes, eyes red-rimmed and haunted. Emma stood behind him, her wedding dress now a mockery of innocence, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Michael looked between them and felt nausea rising. "Start talking," he said, his voice hollow. "And it better be the truth. All of it." What came next was a confession so unexpected that Michael had to sit down on the closed toilet lid to process it. Robert started speaking, and the words came out in a flood, as if they'd been dammed up for years and the barrier had finally broken. Emma wasn't who Michael thought she was, not entirely. She was his half-sister. 26 years ago, before Michael was born, Robert had a brief affair during a rough patch in his marriage. The woman, Emma's mother Catherine, had gotten pregnant. Robert, terrified of losing his wife and destroying his young marriage, had made the cowardly choice to walk away, to deny paternity, to pretend it never happened. Catherine had moved 2 towns over, raised Emma alone for years, and eventually married a kind man who adopted Emma and gave her his last name. Emma had grown up never knowing the truth about her biological father. She had been told her father died before she was born. But 6 months ago, Catherine had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 3 to 6 months. Catherine, facing death and wanting her daughter to know the truth, had finally told Emma everything. She'd even provided evidence, old photos, letters Robert had written in the early days, a DNA test Catherine had done without his knowledge years ago. Emma's entire world had shattered with that revelation. Everything she thought she knew about her identity, her family, her father, was a lie. She was the product of an affair, abandoned by a biological father who went on to build a picture-perfect family just a few towns away. The man who adopted her, the man she'd called Dad her whole life, was wonderful, but not her blood. And her biological father, Robert, was respected and beloved by everyone, had sons he'd chosen to raise while abandoning her. Emma spent weeks wrestling with what to do with this information. Part of her wanted to confront Robert, to make him acknowledge her, to demand answers for why he'd thrown her away. Another part wanted to bury the truth and preserve the illusion of the life she'd built. But then she started thinking about Michael differently. She'd been dating him for 3 years by this point, completely unaware they were related. They'd built something real, something beautiful, and she loved him genuinely. When she learned the truth, the horror of it nearly destroyed her. She was in love with her half-brother. They'd been intimate. They were planning a future together. The relationship that felt so right was actually impossible, prohibited, wrong in ways that made her physically sick when she thought about it too long. She tried to end things with Michael twice in those 6 months. She'd created distance, picked fights, tried to push him away without explaining why. But Michael, devoted and patient, had fought for the relationship, had asked what was wrong, had promised they could work through anything together. And Emma, caught between truth and love, between morality and desire, had made the decision to go through with the wedding while secretly planning to tell Michael the truth afterward, to give him the choice of what to do with their marriage once he knew everything. But Robert, watching his daughter prepare to marry his son, had been drowning in guilt. He'd planned to confess everything to Michael before the wedding, but kept losing his nerve. The chest pains that sent him to the hospital? Anxiety attacks brought on by the weight of his secret. He'd decided that morning he would tell Michael right after the ceremony, during a private moment, would confess his sins and beg for forgiveness from both his children. But during the reception, Emma had pulled him aside, told him they needed to talk privately, led him upstairs. She'd finally decided Michael deserved to know before the wedding night, before they crossed any more lines. She'd asked Robert to help her tell him, to be there when the truth came out, to face the consequences of his choices together. They'd gone to the bedroom to figure out how to break the news, and in a moment of overwhelming emotion, decades of abandonment and guilt colliding with newfound connection, they'd embraced. Just an embrace. A father holding the daughter he'd never known, both of them crying for the life they'd been robbed of by his cowardice. But Emma's dress had gotten caught. Robert's shirt had come untucked as they held each other, and the scene Michael had walked into was innocent, but looked exactly like the worst betrayal imaginable. When Robert and Emma finished explaining, the silence in that bathroom was suffocating. Michael stared at them both, processing information that rewrote his entire reality. Emma wasn't just his wife, she was his sister. His father, the man he'd admired his whole life, had abandoned a child and built his family on a foundation of lies. The woman Michael loved had known for 6 months they were related and had still gone through with the wedding. Every person in this scenario had made choices that were understandable yet devastating. Michael felt anger and betrayal, but also a strange empathy for the impossible positions everyone had been in. Emma spoke then, her voice barely a whisper, saying she understood if he hated her, understood if he wanted the marriage annulled immediately, understood if he never wanted to see her again. She said she'd fallen in love with him before knowing the truth, and that love had made her selfish enough to hope they could find a way forward even after she learned they were related. She said she was sorry, that she'd wanted to tell him so many times but feared losing him, that she'd made the wedding happen because part of her desperately wanted one perfect day before reality destroyed everything. Robert, tears streaming down his weathered face, told Michael he understood if his son never forgave him, said he'd been a coward 26 years ago, and had compounded that cowardice by staying silent even when he knew Emma and Michael were dating, even as the wedding approached. He said he'd convinced himself that maybe they'd never find out, that maybe he could take the secret to his grave, but guilt had been eating him alive, and he knew he deserved whatever punishment came his way. Michael sat with all of it, his wedding day now a surreal tragedy, his mind spinning with questions about genetics and legality and morality and love. Finally, he looked at Emma and said something she'd never expected. "I need time, but I don't hate you. I can't just turn off what I feel. But we can't be married. You know that, right?" Emma nodded, fresh tears falling. "I know," she whispered. Then Michael looked at his father and said, "You have a lot to make up for. To her, to me, to Mom. I don't know if I can look at you the same way again." Robert nodded, accepting judgment. "I understand, son. I'm so sorry." By sunrise, the storm had passed into exhausted acceptance. The wedding guests had been told there was a family emergency, and the reception had ended early with concern and confusion, but no scandal. Emma and Michael sat together in the garden as dawn broke, their marriage certificate and signed despite the ceremony, their future uncertain but honest for the first time. They agreed to annul the marriage quietly. They agreed Emma deserved a relationship with Robert if she wanted one, that their family was now more complicated than anyone outside that room could understand. They agreed that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes knowing the truth meant making impossible choices. In the months that followed, Emma and Michael both went to therapy, separately and together. Robert began building a relationship with the daughter he'd abandoned, late but genuine. Michael's mother learned the truth and had to decide whether 28 years of marriage could survive such betrayal. It was messy and painful and nothing like the fairy tale anyone had imagined. But it was real. And in that reality, people found ways to forgive, to heal, to redefine what family meant when biology and love and history all tangled into something that couldn't fit neat categories. What would you have done in Emma's place? Could you forgive what seemed unforgivable? If you were Michael, how would you move forward knowing the person you loved was also your sibling? And Robert, was his attempt to make things right too little too late, or does everyone deserve a chance at redemption? These questions don't have easy answers. Life rarely does. What we know is this: secrets have a cost, truth demands courage, And sometimes the people we love most are the ones we hurt deepest, not out of malice, but out of fear and weakness and the human need to protect ourselves from hard truths. If this story moved you, if it made you think, leave a comment about where you're watching from and how this story made you feel. And subscribe because there are more stories like this. Real lives, real struggles, real people navigating impossible situations, and maybe in their journeys, we find reflections of our own.